welcome to another episode of the New York Information Security Meetup. And I have a great pleasure to introduce Dr. Shai Hershkovitz. Thank you very much for joining me today. Much appreciated. How are you?
Great. Thanks for having me, David.
So it's always a pleasure to bring somebody who made the effort and a pursuit to invest the time and effort and dedication to pursue an advanced degree. And I've had a few on the show, and it's always amazing me. People are, everyone wants to do one, but there's I think 1% of the U.S. population has an advanced degree such as this. So why don't we get started and maybe just provide me a primer of how you got to do your PhD? What was the dissertation about? And we'll start from there.
That's a great question, David. So I have an unusual career path, if you will. Like most Israelis, I was drafted to the military when I was 18. That was, a very long time ago. I'm not going to disclose my age at this point. And that was the point in time where my romance, so to speak, with intelligence pretty much started. I speak multiple languages. When I was a teenager, I had and still have a great affinity to geopolitics. So it was pretty natural for me to join the intelligence corps of the IDF. I went through a bunch of training courses and whatnot, and I ended up spending almost 15 years working for the government in various capacities. Some of them were more operational, and some of them were less so, kind of a back office. So I would say that about half of the time, half of that 15 years I spent as an analyst. At some point, for me at least, it was pretty, I knew from pretty much the age of 16 that I'm going to end up getting a PhD in poli-science. That was a passion and still is a passion of mine. So at some point, yeah.
Did you just hear 16?
16.
Because most people at least from my perception, they're most 16 years old that I know of. They're all interested in how they make sure that they have the Xbox Live subscription up and running, as opposed to, so what, you kind of glance over it as if it was nothing, but so tell me about that.
So, it's, first, when I was 16, we didn't have Xbox. We did have Atari, if you remember that. But I was I was a geek, and I am a geek. So, and my passion was pretty much reading and writing from the age I actually learned how to read and write. So, and I was so involved in politics and geopolitics and reading and activities in school and so forth. So it was kind of a natural development for me. So going back to the military, in the IC, the intelligence community, I'm gonna use a bunch of acronyms from time to time. So after my time with the IC, during which I got my bachelor's and master's, at some point I kind of realized this is a time for me to get my PhD. So I did a PhD in poli-science back in Israel. The topic of the dissertation was, it's going to surprise you. It has nothing to do with intelligence nor with technology. It was about Marxian theory, so kind of political philosophy, if you will, adopting kind of traditional Marxian concepts with kind of updating them, adding system theory to the mix, and a bunch of more contemporary theories that would allow us to better analyze capitalism as a social system. That's the gist of it.
And you had to, and one thing I mentioned for those who are not aware, in order for you to receive your advanced degree, you have to have a significant contribution to the space.
Correct.
So it's not enough for you to finish a couple courses. You have to go through it, and then you have to stand in front of a committee of fellow PhDs, and then they grill you. They're trying to break your dissertation apart of what you've proven. And so for people not aware, the whole process is I would say it's
it's tedious. It's frustrating sometimes.
but it's also the ability to maintain course for a long period of time without giving up. So it's definitely a tenacity kind of, method to test yourself.
Yeah.
So it's not for everyone. A lot of people start a PhD, but not that very many people actually complete it.
Yeah, I was able to actually complete it in a relatively short time. If there's one skill, one superpower that I acquired during my time at the IC, was the ability to quickly digest, scores of information in various types, scientific and otherwise, and then put it in writing. So to shorten the path from reading something when it goes through your brain all the way down to your hands.
So let's double click on the military service, because again, you kind of glance over and you said, okay, condense the whole 15 years in 30 seconds. But first and foremost, there's a selection process, and not everyone gets selected to your particular role. And then the training, the type of hands-on experience that you received throughout those years, there's not a lot of things that are equal in the civilian life, in the private sector. So if you don't mind, can you prove or disprove what I just said?
Yeah, I think you're spot on. Of course, when this is that's an experience that's pretty alien to, I would say, Americans, unless they decide to join the military. But
so Shai, we were chatting in regards specifically about your background, your training in the defense forces. You said that you came in, you went through I'm assuming a rigorous selection process, and then they train you to become an analyst. And my question was specifically whether there's something similar, like in terms of experiences, that someone will go into the private sector and go through, or is it completely different?
Well, I think it's somewhat different, mainly because of the fact that you're taking 18-year-olds, sometimes a few weeks or a few months after they finished high school. You put them through this process of course, basic training, which sometimes could look like a Full Metal Jacket scene. And then you take them and you train them on the various aspects of intelligence. And that's an amazing but highly demanding task for young people. You need to basically absorb large quantities of new information. You deal with top secret stuff. Not all the time, but from time to time, you deal with sensitive information. And you are exposed to novel technologies, and within a relatively short period of time, you are expected to start delivering. So imagine, a 19-year-old. They are responsible for the lives, if it's an operational role, for the lives of people who are just 1 year younger than they are. But also the topic itself, highly complex. You get to deal with the utmost novel, innovative technologies that are out there, and you get the responsibility basically to do what's all the tasks that you're given. So I don't know that there is something similar in the private sector. Yeah.
And then, so for those people that are not familiar with the kind of the intelligence process and what does it mean, what's the day-to-day look like for an analyst? I'm assuming that you've been given a task to review massive amount of information and then figure things out, just in terms of be able to distill the information, gather, figure out whether the information is correct and how it's in context to what you're looking for. And all of that is typically it's been done under a pressure of time, because any information that you can gather, if it's not really actionable, sometimes even hours afterwards, right? So walk me through kind of that process of what the job looks like, and then maybe potentially as a next question, what are the qualities or attributes of somebody who can excel in that position?
Yeah, so that's a great question. A day in the life basically looks like, come to the office, you turn on your terminal, you read, you go through a lot of information, pretty much what happened everything that happened since the last time you actually went over all the material. And then you need to start working on pretty much reporting on what you read. Sometimes you write short reports, can be as short as a paragraph. Sometimes these are more strategic, deeper pieces of analysis. Usually you work in a group, so you don't do everything, autonomously in that sense. And there's a pretty rigorous process of approving the stuff that you produce, all the content that you produce. So it's not that, I think of something, I write it down, and it goes directly to the Prime Minister or the Joint Chief of Staff or anything like that. It goes through a certain cycle. Now, I want to tell you something, David. So I was drafted when the year of 1994. Here's an interesting factoid. So there was a study done about 15 years ago that compared the task of a Paul Mill analyst, so basically an analyst that works in the political and military setting. How much do they need to read? So in 1996, and I'm talking about a U.S. Intelligence analyst. So in 1996, an analyst that covers second-tier countries, so not the top, most urgent stuff like terror and stuff like that, all right? So second-tier, third-tier, they would need to read about 20,000 words a day. Fast forward 10 years, around the year of 26, 27, around the time that the study was done, they needed to read 200,000 words. So 10x, compared to 10 years before that. Now, if you do only that all day long, there's no way on earth that you will be able to cover everything. See, and of course, there are a bunch of other things that you do. For example, you write, and you write a lot. So another study that was done by the intelligence community, the American intelligence community, found out that the community produces about 50,000 papers a year. That's insane. Who reads all of that? Even though there's so many agencies and so many consumers and all of that, 50,000, it's amazing. Now, add to that the fact that you're pretty much bombarded with social media and traditional media. So I would say this is the main challenge that separates the old world of intelligence and analysis in general, analysis, research, and so forth, with a new world where the data is abundant and the challenges actually change. It's not just about I need to read as much as I can. It's more about sense making. I don't need humans to do the hard labor, tedious task of collecting information, sifting through that, storing all the information, and so on and so forth. You can use machines nowadays to do that for you. You can use AI and all of that. So that basically brings one to the question, all right, so what's the role of the humans in this establishment, the intelligence establishment or national security establishment? Well, I would argue, and that's one of the main arguments in my book, my new book that deals with emerging technologies and intelligence communities. I argue that the role of humans is mainly to be sense makers. So to take all this information, to extract relevant insights, and not least important, actionable insights, and deliver that to the recipient, so to speak. But recipient might hint that I'm seeing them as passive observers, if you will, so kind of consumers of information. One of the characteristics of this day and age is that they also, the decision makers, take for example, former U.S. president who completely trashed the IC. One of the things that became pretty apparent is that I'm talking about Donald Trump, that he uses social media as the main source of information. Now, you might see that you might say that it's ridiculous, but I think that with all the problems associated with Mr. Trump, one thing that I think he made very clear, and that's the fact that intelligence organizations need to reinvent themselves in order to keep or to maintain their relevancy. And they can no longer work in these old kind of structures and more processes and so forth. So one person comes into the office, they read, they write, and that's it. So it's kind of an assembly line logic, which is no longer applicable. And going back to your question, David, about, what does it mean to be a good analyst? I can tell you what it meant 20, 30 years ago. You needed to be an intellectual, super curious individual with the basic smarts. That is no longer, in my opinion, relevant. The new intelligence analysts need to also understand technology pretty deeply, because that division between the person who collects information and the person who analyzes the information is no longer there. They do both. And I think the cyber domain demonstrates that pretty nicely, right? If you want to, penetrate a certain system, to do something, whether to collect information or to actively, tweak the system that you're penetrating, what are you exactly? Are you an analyst? Are you a collector? Are you a hacker? Are you all of the same? What happens when you try to infiltrate closed social media groups, for example, of terrorists? You also need to understand the language. You understand, if you want to keep your cover, of course. You understand the language. You need to understand the culture. You need to understand the little hints that separate the real mavens or the real members of such a community from the rest. And they're very cognizant of, such attempts to infiltrate the ranks. I hope it answers
Dr. Hershkovitz, yeah, it did. Dr. Hershkovitz, I have so many different questions that come up from what you just said. I'm trying to keep it all in order. And that's the beauty of having an unscripted conversation, because we can, dive into the rabbit hole. So first and foremost, let me ask you this. What's the root cause of the explosion of data? Is it just the devices that are now different, like in terms of how we generate? Is it the people are just more involved? Everyone can become a writer? What's the root cause specifically of the explosion of information that we are bombarded on every day?
Well, it's all the factors that you mentioned and then some. First, the fact, to me, in this particular point in time, I see IoT as the main driver. There are reports, Cisco and others, that predicted by the year of 2025, you're going to have about 100 billion connected devices. I think that's an underestimation of the real revolution. Now, every such device streams tons of information constantly. What do you do with that? Where do you store all of that? How do you get access? And so on and so forth. Or even before you start analyzing the information, right? Trying to look for patterns and so forth. So that's one thing. And then the popularity of social media. I think pretty much everyone they have their own voices. They can express their opinions and so forth. It's very hard, very difficult to kind of separate, to cherry pick only the relevant pieces of information. Of course, the relevancy question is also, it's becoming, problematic, because certain answers, certain questions, intelligence questions, mysteries as we call them, or secrets, there are no definitive answers. You can answer such questions with various sources. How do you, bring everything together? So that's a big challenge as well. And then I would also add more emerging technologies. So the generative art, for example, right? All the DALL-E and all of these engines that basically GPT-3 and such models, AI models, they themselves also generate information. And then it becomes a problem. How do you separate the real information from the mis and disinformation? It's very hard nowadays to distinguish the two. So all of that kind of creates a tsunami of information that one needs to deal with in intelligence organizations, as in organizations that their raison d'etre is pretty much gathering information and making sense out of it. It becomes problematic. So there's a dire need for a radical revolution, and not just an evolution in intelligence affairs. So it's not, okay, we will do what we did, 5-10 years ago, but slightly better. No. This is a whole different ballgame. You need to come up with new concepts, new methodologies, new processes, structures, and all that.
And I have a specific question regarding the potential for bias. And the reason I'm asking this is because I have a follow-up question I'll ask you down the line. But in terms of analysts, right, specifically, how do you make sure that, because as you mentioned, you have to be an intellect, somebody who knows how to interpret. But that interpretation has a bias of sorts, because you come from a different background. You may read something that has one context and contextualize it very differently, just because due to the fact that you come from a different background. How do you overcome that, especially when we're talking about some critical, actionable intelligence that you gather?
So I actually dedicated many years to studying biases, the various types of biases, and pretty much ways to overcome such biases, not just in the context of intelligence, but also from a more general point of view, right? As an analyst, as a researcher, as a part-time academic, I'm concerned about that. Let me start by saying that there will always be biases, because that's part of human cognition. And biases were created as part of an evolutionary process. So, for example, one of the most common biases is pretty much doing tomorrow what we did yesterday, right? And so kind of finding old solutions to new problems, if you will. Now, that's something that kind of kept us alive when, in prehistoric times, you would go in the jungle, you'll hear a sound from the bushes, and it's a lion, right, trying to eat you. Next time that you go in the jungle, you hear a voice in the bushes. You won't wait to see if it's a lion, if it's a tiger, or if it's a butterfly. We'll just run. That's a bias right there. Okay, so it's part of what it means to be human. It's part of what it means to think. Having said all of that, so I'm trying to say there's no good way to eliminate bias altogether, but there are ways to reduce biases. And bias, by the way, is also a part of the AI problem, right? Because the AI engine and its whatever it produces is only as strong as the data that it collects. But what happens if the data itself is biased? So you only reflect a certain portion of reality, if you will. So the good news is there are ways to overcome or to minimize biases. First, being aware of that danger, and second, I would say I'm a true believer in crowdsourcing. I'm an expert in crowdsourcing and open innovation. I think when you put together a group of analysts, or just a group of humans, and as long as you make sure that it's a diverse group of people, so you have people from various genders, and you have people from various fields of expertise and cultural background and all of that, then your chances of group thinking and other types of biases decrease significantly, because you can constantly challenge your perceptions by new perceptions. And that is something that I think one of the arguments in my book, by the way, is to bring the concepts of open innovation, to bring the concepts of crowdsourcing, or a subset of that which is called expert sourcing, so a group of experts, basically to bring that into the intelligence domain, in allowing intelligence professionals basically to kind of step away from the immediate suspects, or the small group of people that are trained similarly, come from the same cultural background and all of that. So all the potential pitfalls of creating biases.
So one of the questions that you brought in, the fact that we are creatures of many years of evolution, and there's a lot of inherent behaviors and cognitive abilities and things that we have inherited from the evolutionary process of being human that are now we have to deal with technology, or just at least be aware that we have these limitations. And one of them, as you mentioned specifically, is the bias. Are there any other things just like that are related to intelligence gathering, information processing, as being humans, aside from bias? Is there anything else that you come across during your research?
Yeah, so I'll answer your question from a slightly different angle, but I will get there. So there is a heated debate among intelligence professionals, past and present, about the role of humans in this venture called intelligence, right? Especially in light of emerging technologies, mainly AI and big data, but not limited just to that. So the question is, where does it leave us as humans? should we just kind of outsource everything and ask machines to do the collection, the analysis, writing reports and all of that, which, by the way, they can already do today, let alone in the near future? Or, as others might say, this is just too risky for, intelligence and national security deals with matter of great importance, life and death. Can we actually give that to machines to do? To me, that expresses kind of, going back to your question, something that is very natural for humans, basically to stick to what is familiar and being risk averse, especially when it concerns technology. Now, I want to give you an example from a whole different domain. So a few years ago, not long ago, there was an accident of an autonomous car in the U.S., right? And I think it ran over a person and it killed someone. And immediately at that day, they shut down the entire fleet of autonomous cars. One person got killed with all the sadness involved, right? I'm not trying to undermine, not to take that seriously. But people get killed in car accidents every day, in masses, unfortunately.
Yeah,
so
but
our
it's
tolerance,
a machine. It's a machine. Our tolerance for a machine is zero.
There you go. So, and that basically is something that is very human, in my opinion. Now, let me ask you something, David. If you were to go, if you had to go through an eye surgery, what would you prefer? A human surgeon or a machine to do the surgery? Of course, with human supervision, humans will be kept in the loop. What would you prefer, David?
Well, a knee-jerk reaction would be to have the surgeon, but I suspect that if machine can do it much more accurately and better, and who knows if that surgeon didn't have, we're all human. Maybe they had a bachelor or bachelorette party the night before, and they only slept for 2 hours, and you just happened to be the patient number one. And at least when a surgeon does that, you can blame them for for making a mistake. But how do you punish a robot for killing a person or for messing up with your eye surgery? A lot of questions there.
Yeah, exactly. And look, I would go with a machine again because they don't have a bad day, right? It's just they do what they are meant to do. At least for now, until we reach general artificial intelligence or artificial general intelligence. But in any case, going back to your question, David, I think this debate between the old guard, if you will, and the new guard, right, reflects something that is very centric to the profession of intelligence, and that is what's the role of humans in this amazing,
And in order for us to get to the next level, next iteration of adoption of technology, we'll have to overcome all of that. We'll have to figure it out, right? Because we're not going to be able to trust and adopt, computer, digitalization of everything and make everything like being controlled by computers and AI and robots unless we can overcome, some of these biases, or at least have maybe we can even program some of these biases into the code, right? Unless the code takes over,
Absolutely, and I'm not a kind of a doomsday person. I don't think a machine is going to take over anytime soon. Maybe they will in the distant future. But yeah, I think that's a big question. I think the key for such transformation is in terms of a human society, let alone when dealing with large governmental organizations who tend to be very traditional and risk averse. There needs to be a generational shift before such a revolution will take place, before we'll start trusting machines, including accepting the fact that machine can make mistakes from time to time, like humans do, right? So with millennials and Gen Zs becoming more and more prominent as business leaders and leaders as a whole, as decision makers and so forth, I think we will start seeing a massive and rapid adoption of such technologies, even in the cases where it replaces traditional roles of humans.
And this is a great segue. Let's talk a bit about the book. What's the premise of the book? Why did you write it? And by the way, congratulations too, as well. Like, yeah, I always joke around and say that people have a list, like a sticky note on the monitor, make sure to pay the power bill, take the trash out, write a book, and get milk. So like write a book, it's like one of those line items, as if it's nothing, as if like it's going to take you like just the next couple hours, but it's a tremendous endeavor. So walk me through kind of that process of writing one, what the topics are, and who's the book for, and so on. And let's jump right into it.
Yeah, absolutely. So remember I mentioned that when I was 16, I knew that I'm going to get a PhD. So at around the same age, I knew that I'm going to write books. I didn't know I'm going to make a living. I'm not making a living out of it. It's not a very lucrative profession, but it's more for the soul rather than for anything else. And it's not my first book. This time around, I try to write something that is more accessible to the general public, with a specific eye on decision makers. So I try to kind of minimize the theory and the literature review and all the stuff that make academic research very boring, in my opinion. Being a part-time academic, I could say that. And I wanted to write something for decision makers that need to understand that it's high time for a radical transformation of the national security establishment and specifically intelligence communities. So that was the main motivation behind writing the book. Now, over the years, and I've been in the market research, management consulting industries for a very long time, pretty much from the day that I left the IC. So I wrote a double-digit number of future of studies. I wrote the future of banking, the future of whatever comes to mind. One of the things that I wanted to write about was the future of national security and the future of intelligence. That was kind of what, from an intellectual standpoint, what attracted me to investigate this topic. Interestingly enough, around the same time when I started writing the book, or at least doing the research for the book, I worked for the X Prize Foundation. So for the listeners who are not familiar with that amazing nonprofit, the X Prize Foundation runs multi-million-dollar competition basically to incentivize people, ordinary, people like yourself and myself, so citizen scientists, if you will, to come up with technological solutions to humanity's biggest challenges. So we did a study on the future of housing, the future of forest, the future of this, the future of that. It was a very fun job, by the way, because you get to experiment with all kinds of futuristic stuff, technology and other ways.
Now, quick question, Shai, is that when you say future, how far to the future? Is that like 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? What are we talking about?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I'm not a futurist, by the way, even though some of my best friends are. So I'm a practitioner. And I tend to look at the future somewhat near to midterm. So let's say up to 10, 15 years, probably even less, mainly because I think that the future, especially in the long-term projections, it's not more than an intellectual exercise. It's very hard to predict the future. Think, 20, 25 years ago, would you imagine that we will hold a supercomputer in our hands? And it's so hard. Yeah.
I don't know, but if you've seen Back to the Future, they were pretty much spot on in terms of what they predicted to be. I think it was 2015. So they had a lot of. If you look, I've seen a comparison of what they're showing, and the movie was I can't remember what was filmed, but it was filmed like in the 80s.
Yeah.
And they were pretty much spot on. But you're right, it's so difficult to predict. That's why I asked, what's the prediction? And are you afraid that some of the prediction, since you have it in writing, that somebody comes back and say, well, you were completely wrong?
Well, I hope. Yeah, I hope that they would do that. When people talk about predictions, some of them, not all of them, but their tendency is to say, here, I was right. I anticipated X, Y, and Z. Only seldom do they mention the stuff that they didn't they weren't able to predict, right? So that's one thing. I'm not trying to predict anything. The book is not about prediction. The book is, and you know what? The book is not even about the future. The book is about the present. So I'm trying to kind of present a comprehensive worldview of how reality is going to look like when emerging technologies will become common. Some of them are already coming. Some of them are more futuristic, like quantum computing and blockchain, and at least in terms of the ability of ordinary people to use that, let alone organizations. But in order to be prepared for the future, you need to act now. These are massive organizations. It's like giant ships. It takes a lot of time for them to change course. And you need to start doing that right away. Otherwise, you will become irrelevant. And to a certain extent, some of them are becoming irrelevant already today. So if there's one prediction, if you will, I would say that we know that the future is going to look radically different than today. We know, we can see the main trends, the mega trends, if you will. I'm mostly interested in technology, but obviously there are other trends like generational shift that I mentioned earlier. So we know it's going to happen. We don't know exactly the tactical stories, if you will, how it's going to happen and when it's going to happen. We know it's going to happen, and we need to be prepared for that. So that's the main argument of the book. Another argument along these lines is the fact that we cannot look or even analyze the impact of these technologies in a siloed way, in the sense that, okay, let's just discuss AI in implications of advanced AI on intelligence work or any other type of activity. You need to see AI, advanced storage capabilities, big data, IoT, quantum computers, blockchain as from a holistic point of view, because everything will pretty much converge. It's already starting to converge. So, and one of the problems of at least the literature in the about national security, intelligence, and emerging technologies is that the literature tends to focus on one aspect, one type of technology, and then kind of deduct from that. And I'm trying to do something broader.
But that's because it's much tougher.
Of course.
It's like this is why we can't predict the weather, because there's just so many variables. The system is so complex that even changing one of the variables will inherently make a significant change in the outcome. I think it's the same in terms of what you describe. Minute changes in certain technologies might have a butterfly effect, to call it that, over the overall impact of the kind of global interconnected systems, right?
So, David, you just opened a Pandora box of talking about predictions is something.
כן, זה...
אוקיי. חשבתי יש פה איזה...
אני אעשה פה מיוט.
אין בעיה. אז אני אתחיל מחדש. So, David, you just opened a Pandora box talking about predictions and the future and all of that. And you mentioned weather forecasting. So I didn't mention that, but climate is one of the topics that I'm probably in the last 10 years or so I became pretty interested in, trying to see how climate plays a role in national security and so forth. It is as you mentioned correctly, climate is a stochastic problem. What is a stochastic problem is basically a random problem. You cannot really predict the future of weather and climate in general. You can come up with a bunch of scenarios, and you can try to understand, okay, what's the probability of a given scenario to unfold, but you can't really predict anything, not beyond 2 or 3 or 4 days, right? And I think that one of the things that intelligence organizations struggle with is the challenge of prediction. If you look at read the CIA website or the Israel intelligence website, and so pretty much any intelligence organization, you will see that their first task is basically to provide decision makers with early warning. Now, early warning is somewhat of an abstract concept, right? What does it mean? Early warning there's going to be a terrorist attack tomorrow, which is something we can do, or early warning that climate is changing, and so we need to be prepared that by the year of 2030, sea level is going to rise by 1 centimeter. I'm just making something up, right? And so the topic of prediction forecasting is crucial to intelligence work. There's also a technological aspect to that. So let me double click on that real quick. Okay. Are you familiar with the story of, I don't know if it's an urban legend or not, but a father that got in the mail brochures for baby stuff, commercials and advertisement for baby stuff, and he was like, "Why am I getting that? Right? I have a 16-year-old." Well, apparently that 16-year-old went online. She got pregnant unexpectedly. Went online, and she was targeted. And now her father started getting all kinds of stuff. This is how we found out. Now, whether it's an urban legend or not, we need to distinguish between prediction and forecasting. Prediction is much more tactical in nature. I can predict a consumer behavior based on big data. I can predict that a terrorist is trying to conduct a terrorist attack based on their stuff in the things that they posted on social media and other pieces of information. Forecasting, on the other hand, is much more abstract, is much more problematic. By definition, it needs to be less accurate. Now, who's the consumer of intelligence organizations' forecasting activities? Well, these are the decision makers. Decision makers are basically risk managers. They have a set of risks, and they need to understand or to decide, I want to focus on this risk and not on that risk. So in that sense, intelligence organizations' role, and I think technology allows them to do that nowadays, is to give them the spectrum of potential scenarios, mid to long term, and the probability of these scenarios to unfold, allowing the decision makers basically to take educated decisions, if that makes sense. Problem is that when people don't understand the true power of AI and big data and such technologies, they expect intelligence organizations basically to predict something that is inherently unpredictable, such as reality in 5 to 10 years from now. You can't mix the two domains. These are two separate domains of human thinking and human cognition.
It's really super interesting because I think most people would combine, prediction and forecasting in the same sentence. So are we there yet? If you look at, you probably watched Minority Report, right? When they arrest you before you commit the crime because they know you're going to commit the crime because they can somehow get all that, Are we there yet? Do we have the ability to profile, adversaries to know that they have the propensity for them to do something?
Well, absolutely. Even before looking at adversaries, which by the way reminds me that one of my key arguments in the book is that if we really want to see how national security is going to look like, and especially intelligence work, we need to draw inspiration from the private sector. And in the private sector, going back to your question, David, yes, such predictions are totally doable. You can predict consumer behavior even before the fact, based on patterns, based on their unique characteristics, based on their behavior, based on what they browsed, and so on and so forth. Same thing happens in the intelligence domain. You can actually, and I'll give you just one example, by monitoring social media, you can see that there's a certain escalation in one's behavior. And what started as, just posting, kind of pretty violent posts, they are moving towards taking action. Now, the question is, and it's an ethical question, can you arrest them? Obviously, you should, in my opinion, of course. You can't be purist when it comes to matters of human lives. But that brings about other questions such as privacy and innocent until proven guilty, right? So it's not an easy topic, but the technology is already there for sure.
And how do you overcome as you mentioned, the massive amount of information? Talk about social media, for example, the ability to the just the sheer amount of postings, whether it's digital, whether it's photos, audio, videos, whatever the case may be, and text in any given moment. How do you monitor that massive amount of flow? It's almost like a river of bits that are flowing online, and is able to contextualize it and make sense of it. No human can or group of humans can do that.
Absolutely, and this is where artificial intelligence comes into play. I think that the challenge is less about collecting the data for two reasons. First, there's an abundance of data, so basically most of what you need is out there. And second, I think that intelligence organizations have a have an advanced set of capabilities, basically to get almost everywhere they want to get. With the cyber domain, it allows them now to work I wouldn't say completely risk-free, but it's not the same as sending an agent to penetrate a certain country and so on and so forth. I think the more challenging issue here is how to make sure that you extract the right insights from this ocean of information. That's the main problem. And then kind of another problem is how do you bring together various types of informations? So text-based, and to me, social media is part of that, but also, visual information and so on and so forth. You have so many types of data these days. How do you bring everything together? How do you create the machine that basically allows humans to use that or to tap into this ocean of information and to extract relevant and actionable insights? I think this is the main problem. That's the main challenge that organizations face.
It's not just about the amount of information. You mentioned the ability to collect all the different areas, and then also we are very U.S. centric, so the language is English, right? English, Spanish, but then the world has hundreds of languages. That requires the ability for somebody to contextualize and understand very specifically, the language and the nuances associated with that language. I've heard that natural language processing, NLP, is being used to overcome some of those. How effective is that tool today? And, are we there yet in terms of being able to process that amount of information? And then do you believe that the last analyst has already been born?
So let me start with your last question. I think that we will still need human analysts, but how we train them and their characteristics and education and all that needs to be radically changed. So, but going back to your question about NLP and so forth, I think you're spot on. There have been amazing advances over the last few years. GPT-3 is one of them. In generative art is another type of. It's not really NLP, but I would put that under the same bucket. But I think that the revolution is only started these days. If you had experimented with GPT-3, it's amazing. It's an amazing tool. I actually read a short story and a short Neil Gaiman story produced by the model, by GPT-3. It looks like it reads like a Neil Gaiman story.
And for those who are not familiar, with the tool, what can you just give us like 20 seconds about what that is?
Yeah. So GPT-3 is a generative pre-trained transformers. It's basically a model that was trained on trilliards of parameters. And what is amazing about it is that if you type in a question, and the questions need to be really well framed, but if you type in a question, it'll spit out an answer. Now, it doesn't look for an answer, a similar answer, and extracts that from wherever. It produces something novel that doesn't exist in the world. And this is exactly this is why I mentioned the Neil Gaiman story, because the model was trained on Neil Gaiman's writing. He's a sci-fi author, and it was able to produce something completely new that was not written by the human called Neil Gaiman. It was produced by the machine, but it was trained on Neil Gaiman speak, if you will. Now, other similar capabilities. There is a fascinating company, San Francisco-based, called Primer AI. One of the things that they can do, the products can do, is actually write reports. So the machine actually writes a report based on data that was fed into the machine. Now, where does it leave humans, and especially human analysts, still remains to be seen. In my opinion, there's a crucial role for humans, first to frame the questions in a way that the machine will be able to answer. But also, the current technology, in my opinion, is still not robust enough. It's still not strong enough to produce, scientific papers and to produce geopolitical analysis. But we will get there in a matter of a few years, in my opinion. But what I really like about this technology, the NLP that you mentioned, is the fact that it can extract novel insights that are not that don't exist simply by using the models and how the models were trained. And this is a true revolution. Now, there are a couple of still a couple of challenges. The cultural context that you mentioned, the fact that it's pretty strong on, when it comes to English and Chinese, less so with other languages. There are some advances, but you need to understand what's the problem here. So I speak 5 languages, right? So, there are certain structures to certain languages. So in Arabic, for example, you will start a sentence with a verb. So, go the child. So the child went, or, this is how that's the structure of the language. It's nothing like English or even Hebrew, right? At least ancient Hebrew is more like Arabic. But if you're trying to train a machine, you need to have enough data to train the machine on a linguistic structure that is completely different than English. That's a big challenge. What are you going to do with less popular languages, where you don't have enough data? And I think that there's almost you have enough data, but it still is a challenge when it comes to languages that are not commonly used.
Yeah, and it's amazing. We're trying to solve some issues that technology has created by leveraging technology to help solve the same issues that technology has created. And just I'll mention that things are getting so much better just in terms of the AI models to deliver. Just recently, there was an article that was published that they did an art competition, and they did not, basically what the AI, graphical interface won. They created this art, and then the judges were not informed, and then they picked that one, and then I think there was a big, uproar saying it wasn't right. I don't know, you probably have your own opinion about this. But even though we're not there yet, AI has the great promise to do, good, but also there's some issues associated with using AI for, malicious, nefarious intent, right? Maybe you can just give us an idea of where are we, how long will it take before we get there. In AI, the definition of AI is really for something to be self-aware, right? And we're definitely not there yet. Or at least not that I know.
Well, there was an interesting story about a former Google employee that started conversing with one of the AI models, and he asked the machine, "Are you conscious? What are you afraid of?" And the machine basically replied, "Well, I'm afraid that you will turn me off, literally, not figuratively, and that will mean death to me." So that person basically concluded that, in his opinion, machines do have a certain level of consciousness. Now, what is human consciousness? That's a big question, and there aren't any good answers, in my opinion. There are plenty of definitions, but if we'll be a bit less futuristic, I think that the GPT concept and the generative art models and all of that allow adversaries these days to disseminate disinformation and misinformation pretty easily. Now, the problem that ICs face is how to determine whether something is true or not. Now, true is always contextual, right? So how do you determine that? And there are a bunch of tools these days because the industry is trying to tackle that. The IC is trying to tackle that. I suggest our listeners to take a look at RAND's website. They have interesting studies about the technology around that. There was a study that was published just a few months ago on that topic. But I think that it's kind of a dialectic process. Adversaries will come up with something that would exploit these technologies, but I'm confident that the industry, academia, the IC, or the government, they will be able to find solutions for that. Even though the solutions are not there just yet.
Yeah, fascinating. So, Dr. Hershkovitz, thank you very much. But before we go, what's the easiest way for people to get hold of that book? And, maybe who's the target audience? Who has the most, to gain from getting a copy? And then what's the best way for people to reach out to you to expand on this conversation, comment, just get more information and whatnot?
Yeah, absolutely. I would love, to hear people's opinion, if you agree or, more interestingly, disagree with my notions. So, as I mentioned, the book is targeted mainly for decision makers, but every person basically that is interested in the technologies that are covered in the book and how it would affect, our daily lives ultimately, because, whether we like them or not, and we have a lot of criticism toward the national security establishment, they do keep us safe. With a lot of problems involved in that, of course. But if you're interested in understanding kind of the broader landscape of national security and geopolitics and all of that, I think that's the right book for you. I encourage people basically, to reach out to me. I think the best way would be through my LinkedIn page. I'm working on a website that will go live probably in 2-3 weeks. LinkedIn is probably the safest bet. And the book itself is already in Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and all the large websites.
Yeah, I try to get one, and it says it's going to be released on September 15th.
Yep.
I think. Yeah, yep. September 15th. So,
yep.
What we need to do is we need to make sure that when I get one, you sign it next time I get a chance to meet you in person.
You got it.